Welcome everybody. Nice that you can join us here at this Thursday. This webinar is organized by Fairbanks and 42on, and I'm here to do a short introduction about what we do. Also, I will share a little bit about why we organized this webinar, and after this, I will hand over to our two speakers of today. So my name is Michiel Manten, and that's a Dutch name. And because I know pronouncing the Dutch G, the G in Michiel, it can be hard to do. So you can also refer to me as Michael, Michel, Mikael, or whatever variation fits your language best. So what does Fairbanks and 42on do? Explained in a nutshell, we support teams working with open source technologies. More specifically, Fairbanks support teams working with Linux, OpenStack and Kubernetes, and 42on support teams working with Ceph storage. And we do this by working closely together with clients, starting up conversations with teams, and work until solutions are deployed or problems are solved, both on a technical as on an operational level. And we call this open source infrastructure support. We deliver this support for all major distributions like Red Hat, SUSE, Mirantis, Canonical, but also for open source upstream solutions. At this moment, we are active in 28 countries. We're very proud of that. Over 6 continents, and we work with universities, high schools, research organizations, and other high-tech enterprises. And basically, we do that by delivering our services, which are consultancy, training, emergency assistance, and managed services. So why this webinar? Fairbanks is an Open Infrastructure Foundation member. And earlier this year at the Open Summit in Berlin, we organized interviews to learn more about improving collaboration in the open source world. And there I met Kendall Nelson, and she's an upstream developer advocate for the Open Infra Foundation. And she told me that several members asked them to develop knowledge specific to certain industries. And as you are, let me just check out if there are more participants coming in. Just adding some people, sorry guys. So Kendall Nelson, she's an upstream developer advocate for the Open Infra Foundation, and she told me that several members asked them to develop knowledge specific to certain industries. And Kendall is very focused on the educational vertical. And as you probably know, open source is huge and extensive, and specific knowledge really helps getting the most out of quicker. And sharing this knowledge solves a lot of reinventing the wheel over and over again. And for Kendall, bringing together universities and high schools is key to further success of the Open Infra Foundation. And this is something I recognize very clearly when talking to universities and high schools. I see that some of the discussed subjects are about the same challenges, and some teams solve these challenges on their own, where others are still looking into it and would like to discuss with other universities or with other teams for that matter. For example, what do I do now that Red Hat supports CentOS in a different way? Christoph will tell you a little bit about that later. Or SUSE stops supporting SUSE Enterprise Storage. CES, what are my options? Can I migrate to upstream Ceph, or and to what version should I upgrade and how? Or for example, how do I combine certain technologies to create the most efficient infrastructure stack? And bringing together these universities and high schools and sharing this knowledge saves a lot of time. And it was interesting to see that our educational clients use open source based on their specific requirements, flexibility, and the possibility to grow without limitations. And when we ask our clients, they confirmed this and shared with us the drive to collaborate more. And the idea for this webinar was born. And today, 2 universities will share their experiences and knowledge about their open source infrastructure in education, so that you all can learn. So our speakers of today, I would like to introduce you to Lars Biemans. And I know Lars for quite some time now, and for the Tilburg University at this moment, 42 on, is migrating Ceph from version Ceph Nautilus to Ceph Pacific. And after the presentation of Lars, or during the presentation, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat, and we will handle some of the questions after both presentations, depending on how much time we got left. All right, Lars, you can go ahead in a minute now. Yes.
Let me see if I can share my screen. So my screen should be visible now.
We see your screen. Yeah, very good.
Wonderful. Well, my presentation is about thriving on open source in an ever-changing IT world, based on my perspective from the knowledge I gained over the last couple of years. So who am I? This is me. I'm Lars Biemans. Most of the time I'm fairly enthusiastic, and when it comes to topics I know a fair amount of, I tend to get super enthusiastic. I'm proud father of two. In my spare time, I like to barbecue. And like you can see from the Tilburg University logo, I work for Tilburg University for about 11.5 years now. Why? Wait. When I say 41, just pass it as Fairbanks, because they use both names. Why do we use or choose open source? Well, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, why don't you choose for open source or open infra tools? I think it's all about choosing the best fit for your purpose. So it can be that you run Python on Windows. It's just what suits you best, what fits best for your needs. At our university, it's a wish from education and research, because a lot of code is written in Python or R, which are open source languages. I can say that we have very good in-house knowledge and we experiment a lot. I think open source comes with a lower overhead and a large community. From my perspective, the community is a bit like a city. So the community is large, but it feels more like a village. So when you set your first steps in open source and get to know the community, I see that a lot of times you see the same faces, virtual faces, and everybody's willing to help their neighbor. So some of the tools we use and some lessons we've learned. Well, we use Python, and what we've learned is that it's good to install Python on your machines, but only install the packages everybody needs within Python and let the users decide what they need, what versions they need, and let them just install them in user space. So a while ago, we chose to switch to Anaconda because then the users can create their own virtual environment, do their own testing, and just can set up a plain environment whenever they need it. Write proper documentation and procedures. Sounds fairly simple, but do it and keep them in one location and make sure everybody knows where the data is stored. Because if it's scattered around 20 different places, 20 different versions of documents, get there and nobody knows what the real truth is. Slurm. About, I think, 1.5 years ago, one of our researchers asked us, can we buy 4 GPU servers? Yeah, of course, just give us a bag of money and we'll order the servers for you. But then it comes to a bit of workload management, because otherwise all students will just take the whole server. So we decided to introduce Slurm. But with Slurm, there are some issues you might face. So what we decided was to write some documentation with the lecturer. How can you create an SSH key? How can you give it to us? How can you run Slurm? So how can you do your basic research jobs? Ceph. Hooray, we use Ceph. And this is where our party Ceph or 40-1 or Fairbanks comes into place, because I think it is about 5 years ago, we decided to go for Ceph. We installed it with the old owner of 40-1, Wido den Hollander. But now we are getting the update done. We need to set up some accounts so 40-1 can do the upgrade for us. So my advice for you would be, don't wait as long as we did, because now we have to do a very difficult upgrade of Ceph, because we have to do some operating system updates as well as some Ceph updates, because we will move from Ceph Nautilus to Ceph Pacific, like Michiel said. But we also move from Debian packages to a Dockerized Ceph environment. So if we would have stayed better up to date over the years, this upgrade would be less harsh to do. We are using Kubernetes at the moment. Some of the lessons I have learned so far of using Kubernetes is that it's a good habit to go for a GitHub style. So have one place you place your YAMLs, keep them in sync, because otherwise there will be version drift of your deployment, version drift of your code. Maybe just over document all your deployments. Why did you do what? When did you do what? What YAMLs did you run? Which variables did you take? When you start with Kubernetes, do your homework and decide which container runtime you use, because we started with Docker, but that wasn't it. So we moved to CRIO, and that works like a charm now. But what I learned is just go for the CNCF landscape, see what tools are out there, choose the one that suits your needs, and go for that one, because if CNCF has it on the landscape, it should be a proven product. Another one on Kubernetes is choose a reliable storage class. We chose NFS first, but yeah, like you might know with NFS, if you reboot the server, you have still file handlers, and all your bots using persistent volume claims get stuck, and you need to reboot them, maybe even lose some data. So just choose a reliable storage class, and that's where Ceph comes into place. I started with a little Ceph test cluster, and I, without lying, can say that within 2 hours I had my Ceph cluster and a running provisioner for persistent volumes within Kubernetes. And that works like a charm. If we reboot one node, no problem at all. As long as he comes back, we can reboot all other nodes within the Ceph cluster. So very happy that we found out how to get Ceph working with Kubernetes. Another one for Kubernetes is decide which OS to run underneath your Kubernetes. And most of the servers we use run Debian, a custom ISO file we built, but it was too hard to get everything working for Kubernetes, all schedules, etc. So we went for Ubuntu, because Ubuntu has some better integration for Kubernetes. We also use Docker for Jupyter Lab and some other tools. But my advice would be just go for only IP version 4 or IP version 6 to provision your Docker containers, because if you use dual stack, you can get some nasty side effects, which we got with our Jupyter Lab test environment, which got very unstable, and we didn't know why, but it turned out to be IP version 6 related. So we are at the moment starting our first Azure landing zone. Something I've learned from the setup of our landing zone is it's good to move to the cloud, but only have a select couple of people attached to this project. All engineers want to know how Azure works, of course, or how the cloud works, but make them ambassadors. Let them do the talking for you. Let them go back to the team, ask them, okay, what are the needs? What are you skeptical? What would you like to see? And let them be the ambassador and talk with the project team. Jupyter Lab, another interesting one, because we had Jupyter Lab installed as packages, then we moved those packages to Docker, then we are moving Jupyter Lab to our Kubernetes cluster, but making a backup of a containerized or packaged version of GitLab and restoring it into a Kubernetes environment. I wouldn't try to do it anymore. So I think we will go for greenfield, just install GitLab and let the users do the migrations themselves, let them import their projects, because if you upload your backup, it will restore, but a lot of secrets get lost, are wrong, you can't register any GitLab runners. So my advice would be just go for greenfield GitLab. And the last one I will talk about for the tools and lessons learned is Subversion. Commit your code regularly, because otherwise you will get some version drift. And make sure not to commit secrets, plain text secrets, but that also goes for Git. So have the decency to not include any secrets within your Subversion. A little side note for Subversion, a colleague of mine told me that around 2003, we started with the use of infrastructure as a code. We found that out by searching through our SVN commits. So what do we realize with these tools? Jupyter, DNS, websites, and much, much more. What do we use these tools for? Well, mainly for research, for websites, for our Oracle data warehouse. But nowadays, more and more for development, for CI/CD pipelines, etc. Pitfalls and challenges. Well, one of the pitfalls or challenge is the amount of work that has to be done by a small group of people. What I see within other organizations and inside our own organization as well, is that there's a lot of work, complex work, that has to be done by only a small amount of people with specific knowledge, but still only a little subset of people. So how do we overcome this? Hire externals, get ourselves skilled. So like our developers just took a CKED training, and the Unix team, which I'm part of, will get a CK training within the next couple of weeks. So the amount of tools that do almost the same, but how to find the best fit. Well, it's all about listening to what your organization wants and then go to search for a partner. So we have some project managers in-house, information managers, and they should go to the faculties, ask, what do you need? And they should channel the needs to others. Go to talks and webinars like this one of your vendors or support parties, but stay away from sales pitches. So like we went to EdgeCase and Lug, academic sessions last year, which were very valuable because you speak with other universities and can share knowledge with each other and see where they see pitfalls and challenges and how did they overcome them. I think another one related to this one is how to get the right people connected. So when we developed our new mail cluster, we made sure that we had a technical contact at the parties who send mail on behalf of Tilburg University's primary domains. So if there were technical issues, if we needed SPF records, DKIM keys, DMARC policies, we could ask those guys, okay, this is what we want to do. What do you think of it? Is this correct? Can you supply us with the details we need from you? So no extra baggage from project managers and so forth, so on. I think this one goes for a lot of universities as well. The war on talent. It's very hard to find qualified colleagues because everyone is searching for IT people, but only the recruiters seem to find people because they can pay them a lot and take them off the market. The rise of paper certified people. What I see more and more is that people get a lot of certifications, but don't get any hands-on experience. So if someone comes to you and says, okay, I can do the job, just ask them very, very hard questions that you know the answer of, but that they can show that they really have hands-on and in-depth experience. The rise of DevOps and ABAC. In the beginning, I was, well, anxious for how this would turn out, but more and more, we are working with the developers very closely, setting up Docker containers, introducing Kubernetes, creating CI/CD pipelines. So I think it's a good thing to embrace the DevOps movement, because it can help keep shorter lines. It can help create fast iterations of programming, but make sure everybody knows which his responsibilities are. The developers need to develop code. The operations guys need to deploy it, or at least make sure they have a stable foundation to run the code on. The anxiety for the cloud. Well, it's what I told before. I was fairly skeptical of the cloud before, but it helped me that colleagues took me by the hand and walked me through the steps of what were they doing, what were they implementing in the cloud, how does it work. So yeah, I get more and more enthusiastic about the cloud, and I think it's good to just share your knowledge with your colleagues. And sometimes it's good to say, yeah, okay, I don't know, I have a little bit of anxiety for the cloud as well, but let's see how we can make the best of it. The anxiety of sharing with each other, learning from each other's mistakes. What I see is that what we did before was talk to other universities about technical issues they were facing and we were facing. But those contacts, it runs dry after a couple of mails. So I think we need to be more persuasive and just keep the conversation going, because we all are doing almost the same things. And why won't we share our knowledge with each other? Here to help. It's hard to find a trusted partner with the right mindset and the right weight to support you. There are a lot of support parties, but how to find the one that suits you best? That's a hard one, but luckily we are in the position that we know some large companies, some good companies with a well-known track record. And if you don't know who to choose, just ask the community for guidance, because they are there to help and they have a good understanding of what the support parties are. Yet more pitfalls and challenges. That's when my little friend Tux comes into place. One of the pitfalls we are facing is it's hard to stay up to date because you have different stakeholders. They introduce a PHP app written in PHP 5, but how do you upgrade to PHP 7? That's almost impossible. So at the start of a project, make sure that there also is an upgrade path. How do you make sure your code gets maintained? Find more than one developer who can maintain the code, who knows what the program does, who knows how it works, and let them assist you and maybe even go for the DevOps approach. How to phase out legacy. It's almost impossible to phase out your legacy, because when you phase out the last legacy system, the first system that wasn't legacy will be legacy. So sometimes you just need a bit of pressure from higher up the tree, but also make sure that if you set up some new environments, that you know when can you turn them down or shut them off, how do you maintain them, who is responsible for what. And another one is move to developers. What you see more and more is that somebody creates a fabulous program, but then decides to do something else or just leaves the company, and then you're stuck with that source code, which you don't know how to edit. So make sure there's more than one developer who can maintain the code and who knows what the program does. And I promise you, these are the last pitfalls and challenges I have for you today. The we can do it cheaper mentality. A lot of times we think, okay, yeah, that's a nice program. It costs 100,000 euros. We can do it better, or we can do it cheaper. Well, our management has decided to go for a search the market first approach. So see what you can buy in the market, and then if it doesn't suit, if it doesn't fit our needs, we can program it ourselves. But I think, to be honest, the cheaper part is often invalid, because you have to calculate the hardware costs, the training of your staff, the maintenance, your hardware. So that costs a lot. And I even think that the we can do it better part might not work as well, because you need to train your people, you need to know the code, and you need to maintain the code. The uniformity in the usage of tools. All IT guys have their own way of logging into their systems, placing their systems inside VLANs, the usage of tools. So what we are deciding is to run a simple virtual machine within the data center, to which we can go via SSH or via RDP, depending on which operating system you run. And from there, do all your maintenance. So we don't have any systems, or we are going not to have any systems in the border, only inside the data center, from where you can do your maintenance. And I even decided to take the most tools I use on a daily basis and put them inside a Docker container, which is portable for me. So if I create a new virtual machine, I can just pull my Docker image from our in-house repository and start using it again. And this is the last challenge I have in store today. That this is my machine, this is my knowledge area. I think this is common for a lot of IT organizations, that people who set up a machine want to keep the machine, and it's a little like it's the child. But since we are getting more and more multidisciplinary teams, and we are moving towards an agile approach, I think it's a good habit to just share your knowledge internally and give your colleague a machine you owned before, and just tell them, okay, this is what I did. Go your way, and I'll guide you. We also decided to get some extra hands from a third party, in this case, Fairbanks, to help us with the migration of our Ceph cluster, and it's starting to pay off all the things. So the last slide, to wrap it all up, please don't be afraid to try out open source tools and make use of the community. They are there to help. And find yourself a trusted partner for your more commercial and mission critical support. It's good to just do some experiments with some packages, some products, but maybe it's also good to have a partner in mind if it is something you want to use and it is getting mission critical. But most of all, please let's start sharing knowledge, and don't be afraid to ask each other for help. So that was it.
Good, Lars. Thank you very much for the talk. I think it's very interesting to see, to learn more about your pitfalls and how you solve these. And I also really liked it that you mentioned about to keep persuasive and keep the conversation going. So that's awesome, I think. All right, I would like to proceed to Christophe Trefois. Can you share your first slide already, Christophe, right now?
Yeah, if you hand it over to me.
Sure. One moment, please. Thanks, Jonathan, for the compliment. Go ahead, Christophe. I think you can share your screen right now. So I know Christophe also for quite some time now. I guess Christophe even longer than Lars, I guess, for the University of Luxembourg. For the last years, we have been delivering support on the OpenStack platform. Until so far, we have supported the OpenStack infrastructure based on Canonical, and soon we will build up a new infrastructure based on Red Hat, which we will also support. And yeah, awesome things, Christophe. Go ahead with your presentation, please.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I just get this. Okay, great. So before we dive into the more techy side of things, maybe we take a step back and just show you why we are perhaps doing the things we are doing. So we are a research institution at University of Luxembourg, and our team is trying to help researchers to increase their reproducibility in their research activities. And so you see the little helpful guy on the bottom, that's us. And we say, look, we have a nice solution for you. And in many cases, researchers say that they're too busy and so on, even though perhaps the solution would actually make their life easier. And so this is a constant struggle of change management that we have to deal with. And infrastructure is one part of that, but not the only part. So in terms of activities, what our researchers expect from us and what we are delivering, you can see here on the bottom, we are doing a lot of infrastructure work. Then on top of that, we also develop services that are closer to the researcher's data, let's say. So we have things like we offer data stewardship services. We help with data management plans. We offer one-to-one kind of consultancy, like a clinic where people can come and get help on anything related to data, and also some of the more server-related questions, knowledge management, IT risk assessment, and so on and so forth. So then on a daily basis, what does this translate into? And so these are kind of a list of non-exhaustive list of requests that we get from researchers. Some are, I need a machine with 2 terabytes of RAM. Then the next day, someone says, I want 120 cores, but for 3 weeks. So typically HPC applications might not be suitable because we have wall time, or they might be also very costly in some cases. And also, of course, I also would need 10 terabytes of scratch disk available immediately. During COVID, we had a project where researchers wanted to spawn a cluster of kind of secure machines that are isolated from the rest of the infrastructure, so that they can run COVID simulations. And they needed this thing to be running all the time, because every day at 5 a.m., let's say, the ministry expected an update on the daily R estimate values. Some want to have autonomy, so they want to do everything by themselves. Others want to use things like Elasticsearch as a research data store, so not for the typical monitoring and log aggregation type of applications, but really as a backend database. Maybe our central IT is using Microsoft ADFS, but then the web service that the researcher wants to implement only supports OIDC, SAML, or some standard like that. And so they could not connect actually to the university's identity management. And then new things are now coming, like I want Kubernetes to for my CI/CD pipelines and so on and so forth. And of course, the Michael Scott guy at the bottom is not how we feel in reality, but sometimes this is a little bit kind of what we have to deal with, and maybe the user looks like that rather than us, right? So they want things to happen right now and immediately, and of course for free. So if we then how do we accommodate basically the researchers' requests? And so a few years ago, we start with our orchestration architecture, I would say. And so we use Foreman for that, which is upstream of Red Hat Satellite. Perhaps some of you know it. This is basically an orchestration tool to manage virtual machines and physical machines as well. So in the past, via API calls, this then when you create a VM, this gets relayed to the virtualization engine, which in our case is OVIRT, which is also upstream of Red Hat, or maybe it's not the right word to call it upstream, but it's the community edition, let's say, of the Red Hat virtualization engine. And then the machine is created on some physical server, and a bunch of things happen. The machine enrolls itself into our identity management. We set up monitoring using open source monitoring tools, and basically all the base configuration, so the firewall, some basic RC files for the configuration of the tools. Actually, also a set of tools are installed by default via Puppet, and then all this is stored in GitLab. So if you need to know, or if you ask me on this machine which ports are open, I can go on GitLab and check that instead of potentially going onto the machine itself. We run Puppeteer in an active configuration, so every half an hour the machines send a report to a central server, and so we actually do know if someone goes in and changes the config when they did it, and basically after half an hour the configuration is changed back to what we need it to be. Then I would say today we have upgraded some of the components and extended a little bit the overall architecture. So you can see on the virtualization side, we basically added an OpenStack and some Red Hat virtualization. We also have VMware there because that's what our central IT at university is offering. And this is possible drop-in because Foreman has a bunch of integrations to all popular virtualization engines, including clouds like AWS, so basically any public cloud provider. And so the workflow on how we manage and spawn VMs actually doesn't matter. I mean, or rather stays the same, and the technology on which it's deployed can change and doesn't matter anymore. So in addition, we added now an Elastic cluster, which basically may replace Isinga at some point. So that's more for permanent monitoring, and then also centralized log collection. So we have now roughly 400 virtual machines that are sending logs over to the Elastic stack. If we zoom now a little bit into the OpenStack world, so our infrastructure at the moment looks something like this, or it looked something like this until very recently. So we have an access node, a bunch of controllers, and then different zones. So we have what we call an HPC zone. So these are kind of individual machines with very large resources available, where also the storage is local, very fast. Very fast storage is inside of these machines, but then if they are down, they are down. For the researcher, however, this is acceptable risk. Then we have another zone, which is a typical high availability zone, which has compute and storage kind of hyper-converged, so they are all on the same equipment. And then we have legacy equipment that we added into the OpenStack after some years. which are actually also in high availability between each other, but then use a iSCSI protocol, for instance, for the storage. And then we added also in 2018 some backup nodes. So we grew this also over time. And so for this setup, Fairbanks is basically managing the OpenStack layer to make sure that actually the machines stay up. So what do we run on OpenStack? So I think Michiel already mentioned this. We have the OpenStack layer itself on canonical Ubuntu at the moment. And however, we run mostly CentOS machines on top of it. And this also doesn't create any issues as far as compatibility goes. We are now in the process of moving everything to Rocky, and I will give you a little bit more information about that in a second. And we are now setting up a new physical cluster, which will run on Red Hat, and then we will still run Rocky virtual machines on top of that to limit the cost factors. And perhaps in the future, we may even go with a non-Red Hat, non-Ubuntu, so basically like a community edition OpenStack, but still have support perhaps by a partner like Fairbanks for that. So let's go a little bit deeper into Rocky. So why Rocky? So perhaps before going really that deep, we should take again a step back and ask ourselves, why do we actually set up modular architectures like I showed you right now? There are a few advantages to that. The first one is that you have individual components which are more or less complex in their own right, and they communicate via APIs, at least nowadays. And this means that you can take one component and replace it with something else if the other side, of course, supports also the new software. But there's kind of a loose integration, and it allows you to be quite flexible on what you want to use in the end, or what you have to use. So I will come back to that later. In general, networks are more resilient to external perturbations. So if the more kind of small services you glue together, the more resilience you might have. There is also some overhead, of course, because you have to make sure that the interfaces don't break. So there is a balance to find. It's relatively easy to extend, at least in the open source world. Like I said, with Foreman, we just added VMware on top, and you can also connect AWS and so on, and you don't have to do anything, right? You just have to configure the endpoint. And by doing this, you may gradually improve your systems and avoid ending up with IT graveyards where you have legacy systems that are 10-year-old and you can't change anything. If you touch one thing, whole thing explodes, and you're basically you don't want to do that. So if we then finally get into Rocky, so what happened with CentOS, and probably some of you know the story. So the same day, Red Hat very beautifully wrote brought the news out saying CentOS Stream, building an innovative future for enterprise Linux. And the community or the users, which you can see here on the bottom, basically rephrased that into CentOS is dead. And so what happened, right? And so what happened was basically two things. The first one was that Red Hat pulled out financial incentives on the CentOS project as such, and redirected them into a new project, which is called CentOS Stream, and which will be serving a different purpose. And here on the right, you can see how it used to be. And why people use CentOS in enterprise. So you have Fedora, which is the development OS in principle, that was feeding into Red Hat. And after Red Hat fixes a lot of bugs and makes sure that everything is ready for enterprise, CentOS are rebuilding the packages from Red Hat and basically make them available for free. And this means if you use CentOS, you have some guarantees that your system is running enterprise quality software. And so what Red Hat did is they moved CentOS upstream between Fedora and Red Hat, which means that CentOS Stream could potentially now be seen as some kind of testing version before it actually goes into production or enterprise ready mode. And so this annoyed a lot of people. And in addition to that, basically, when CentOS 8 came out in 2020, I think, they said or 2018, like always, they would offer 10 years of support. So a lot of companies started to migrate, and these migrations can usually take up to a year, all their machines to CentOS 8. And on 8th of December 2020, they announced that the CentOS 8 life cycle basically would end the end of next year, so in 2021. And so this means not only do we have a time pressure to find another system, but we also have a time pressure that whatever we have now, the latest OS running, we are actually without support or without updates, let's say, available in the future. And so that's, of course, a single instance, right? So this doesn't happen again. And of course, that's not the truth. So they did it again. And so in 1 year ago, they announced that for the virtualization software stack, let's say, they would basically abandon it and integrate it into Red Hat OpenShift, which is their Kubernetes or container solution. And then what this means for the OVIRT open source project is that they run out of funding and that they are basically now a purely community-driven project without any backing from companies. So regardless of that, we still are excited, of course, to work with open source software. And so we had to choose, right? What do we do? We have to replace CentOS with something else. So it took us 6 months, I think, and I guess a lot of companies or universities perhaps are also still undecided on what to do. I'm not telling you today which one to choose, that's your job, but I will tell you which questions we asked to choose Rocky on our side. So the first one is, what do I need or want from the product? And this could be for any of the open source projects that you're looking at. What kind of stability am I looking for? If it's something that is just running for one person in a small project, it maybe doesn't matter so much. If you use it to run all your infrastructure on top of it, perhaps it is more important to have something with stability behind. Who is behind it? And this is a question we somehow ignored when we are dealing with CentOS, and we should probably know actually who is financing it, who is the driver behind, and what are the interests of either corporations or private people. And can it disappear the next day? Well, in CentOS, it more or less did. There are other projects where it's similar, where companies just announce that they pull out funding and then that's it. And how can I migrate? So we have a look at, are there easy migration paths towards it, and also maybe from it if we are not happy with it. And this has this has to be a factor probably in the evaluation that you're doing. And so for Rocky, for instance, it is a software foundation behind, which is formed in the US, and it's owned by Kurzer, who is the founder of CentOS. And they have an advisory board that is kind of overseeing the activity of this foundation. And so him being the creator of CentOS gives us at least, or gave us at least, some confidence in the ability that they will do it properly. If you look at Alma, for instance, they don't have it owned by a single private person, but by an entity. But there again, you have a couple of companies that are sitting on the board and injecting money into that. And so this is very similar setup to CentOS, and it's like a Mac versus PC discussion. You either believe in the one or the other one, but at the end of the day, you have to choose. So this is what we went with. So what's next then? Well, basically a lot of migrations, constant evolutions in our software, in our architecture landscape, let's say. So as I said, we are migrating our canonical to Red Hat. And again, we are planning to have maybe a non-licensed OpenStack one day. Then, for instance, we are looking at replacing Isinga with Zabbix or with something else. So again, this should be fairly drop-in replacement. We are migrating all our CentOS machines to Rocky. And here we are usually always migrating the service, not the machine. So we don't do distribution upgrades and all this stuff, because you have very often a lot of ghost files and services and whatever that configurations that stay behind. And I'm just not a big fan of this. So we prefer clean things. And then also, if we force the user to migrate the service, they may actually find some issues in their deployment and improve the documentation in that step. So there's some cost, but it's worth it. And this is almost drop-in, this effort, let's say. So there is not too much work involved. Then in so I'm talking if you go from CentOS 8 to Rocky 8, so that's not a distribution upgrade, that's just a labeling change, but CentOS 7 to 8, of course, is something else. Then we have to now look at replacing our virtualization engines outside of OpenStack, since Red Hat decided to go into another direction. So perhaps the community edition of OpenShift, or stay with OVIRT, because they actually plan to continue the project without funding from Red Hat and so forth. And then in the identity world, for instance, we are using FreeIPA, which is the Red Hat IDM equivalent, and we are adding now a Keycloak on top of it for single sign-on and privacy idea for multi-factor authentication. And there as well, we plan in the future to replace FreeIPA with the Red Hat one, because we have now more than 1,000 users. So support may seem like a sensible thing to do. And why we do this is because we want to stay on the almost bleeding edge, let's say, on technology, so that we don't end up in kind of these graveyards that I mentioned before. So open source to the rescue, maybe. No, I think open source can be or is a driver for innovation, because you constantly are able to use the latest technology that is out there, and with that you allow researchers or other stakeholders to basically, push their limits and kind of do new things with technology that is there. If now somebody comes to us and asks what Docker is, we are not really talking about innovation, right? We are talking about 10 years in the past. So I think that's important to have a possibility to be a driver for that. And then open source gives a lot of flexibility. So I hope I convinced you that there is not so much vendor lock-in. If we don't like certain things, we just replace them and we go another path. For all the open source projects, we are not facing this kind of node-locked licensing. So if you have experience with IBM and some sub-products of Red Hat, you are well aware of this cost explosion that comes with having licenses linked to the actual CPU or socket count in your servers and stuff like that. And we can easily scale because we may add more hardware that then can just be used, and we can offer services to the researcher without any issue. For instance, if we want to offer 120 cores to a researcher tomorrow, we can just do that. And if we would have to pay for, for per socket, for instance, the license, if you have a 4-socket server, you may spend 30K or whatever the amount would be just for this one project. And you don't know if the project will be successful since we're in a research environment. So this is just something that we can't do. And in general, maybe if you look enough, someone has already proposed a solution or wrote a program or script that could help you. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel and get stuck in your issues. Probably someone else in the world has had similar issues to you and provide solutions. For instance, Zalando, I don't know if you order shoes on the internet, they became very active in the DevOps environment, and they actually started to contribute to open source projects in PostgreSQL and a few other things. I don't remember now exactly which ones, but then we started to see keynote lectures from Zalando on DevOps techniques and PostgreSQL stuff, right? Which is a bit surprising. So you would never know that if a company like them would, for instance, not go the open route and share the knowledge that they have. So it's not all nice, as I showed you, right? So you should still open source carefully. And the first thing I think that most people feel is that you might feel alone. So if you look at community editions, you ask a question, you get no answer, or people tell you just fix it yourself. You have to look into the code and so on. If that's a problem for you, so in some cases we can accept the issue, or we move on, right? Or you change communities. You know, you realize that in that community the community is just toxic, as we call it. You may not use the product at all, and you try to find a replacement that has a better community. But still, if it's not enough, then maybe you can look for partners who focus on supporting open source. So my understanding is Fairbanks is going down this path, but you have others like Red Hat Canonical. You have other kind of smaller companies who may directly support even community editions of the different open source tools that you have. And then would you choose such a partner? Do you just take the first one, or what are the criteria kind of that make you not again start a spending spree into finding partners instead of buying licenses? So first question maybe could be, can I do it myself? Do I have the expertise in the team? Maybe we don't know that we have the expertise because it's not people's current job. So you may just ask and find out if you have the expertise. The second one in a research environment would be, can I afford downtime? So very often we just ask the researcher, we do some kind of assessment, you know, is this a service that should be up all the time? Or if we have maybe 2 days downtime, in a research project that lasts 4 years, it's not that critical, and this maybe then impacts the support level that we need, and then how much it costs, for instance. And then for the researchers, it's very important if they have any money, right? So we're not talking if they have enough money, but really if they have any money at all. So we are usually struggling to find, you know, third-party funding for this type of expenses, let's say. And so there's something that we did, and that seems to work quite well, is that we start with a community edition, and then for a few years we kind of build up some stable architecture infrastructure. And then if we have a lot of buy-in from the users, we actually may make a business case to ask for money to make it a little bit more robust in terms of support. So we did that, for instance, with OwnCloud, where we now have the enterprise edition. But for many years we were just using the community one. But you know, once it starts to get too important, you can actually have a nice demonstration of why spending a few €1,000 makes sense. And the last thing is on the kind of criteria to in-source or outsource. Perhaps a rule of thumb could be that if a single expertise, so I'm talking here about really the one individual technology or a specific part of a technology, if the cost to outsource will be higher than 1 FTE would cost you per year, you could look at internalizing the function. So if you, however, if you start looking at things like OpenStack or Kubernetes and so on, it may be multiple expertises that are needed, and if you start to add them together, you may actually have more advantages of finding an expert who will only focus on that area and then basically ask you some money for that. So this is kind of a balance to strike and figure out perhaps when is perhaps the right moment to start looking for a partner. So to summarize, in a research IT context, the needs are constantly evolving, and they're evolving very fast. So we're not talking on a 5-year horizon, but it could be a 6 months or 1 year horizon. And the requests come always in the last second. I need this for tomorrow. I need it for next week, and so on. And this means that we have constant migrations going on, and we shouldn't like put them off or hate them. So we try to embrace them. It's part of our job, and we constantly have to change the systems that we use and do upgrades and migrations and so on. And this why? Because we don't want to fall for the technology gap. Like I said before, we had the case where you know, we got asked what Docker is from the IT department 2 years ago, right? That's a little bit strange that after 8 years, they don't know, and that's not their fault. It's just that maybe the system that they are in didn't allow them to explore new technologies when they were available. Same with Kubernetes now, for instance. And support is needed in some critical situations. So you may plan a budget accordingly to support only essential services, for instance. That might be a good place to start, but still embrace the community also of open source. So you have thousands of people who donate their brainpower to the cause, let's say, or to the community, and you can use it. It's free, right? If you believe in it, you can also contribute yourself, or your team members can contribute, which is a way to give back kind of some of their time, even as a hobby. But still, most people that use open source don't make enough use of the community, I think. But then there are also some shortcomings of the community editions that I mentioned before, and you should just prepare for that. So if you know that you may get no response, then maybe you should plan a little bit more time and try to find other ways, or maybe go to a conference and actually meet them, the people behind, and start to network with them. And this is what we did. So we went, for instance, every year to FOSDEM, which is the biggest open source conference that is taking place in Brussels every year. So the conference is free, the lectures are free, and so on in that spirit. And you can see the very top guys in the Linux community there running around, in their sandals very often. and we meet people from OnCloud, from Ovir, from SUSE, from Red Hat, and so on. And we start to actually have a relationship with the developers there. And so perhaps as a last message, I would say that it's not about not spending money, but if we should spend it, then rather spend it on human resources, whether it be inside or outside of the environment, like that we're in the company, the institution, rather than investing into licenses and product solutions. Yeah, that's it from my side.
Awesome, thanks, Christoph. Very interesting to see how you involve with your environment. Very good. I realized we're a little bit over schedule. I planned it. We scheduled the event to be 1 hour. If you need to go, you need to go. If you can stick around for a couple more minutes to answer some questions I picked from the chat and some general questions, that would be great as well. First of all, sorry for pronouncing your name incorrectly. Dewey Njui asks, greeting, apologies, I joined in a bit late. Will the recording be available at a later stage so that I view what I missed? Regards. Yes, Dewey, we are going to put this on LinkedIn, probably, maybe some other channels. Our YouTube channel, we have an own channel with some interesting interviews on there with the Open Infra community. We have a CEF channel with some CEF talks on there. So you probably can find this recording there. Then I have another question from Nua Tukuru. Hi, Lars. Thanks for sharing your experience. Have you thought about OKD when you wanted to deploy your Kubernetes cluster? Are there reasons why you go for vanilla Kubernetes, Lars?
That's a good question. I don't know OKD myself, so I have to Google about it. But when we started with Kubernetes, I think it was about 2 to 3 years ago, the best approach seemed to be for a production-ready environment, just install Kubernetes using kubeadm and etc. But now we are more and more looking to K3s or RK2 with Rancher on top of it. So we are looking inside the market within the CNCF landscape, what the options are for a more lightweight, easier version of Kubernetes. But maybe OKD is an option. I don't know.
All right, thanks. And Lars, while we're at you, where do you think open infrastructure will be in 5 years?
That's a tough one, but I think looking where it can stand within the next 5 years is that more and more companies will embrace open infrastructure, and more vendors will create open source products with maybe even a free version, which has some things you might need. And when you add a license, you unlock some cool features. But when your license term ends, you can still use the free version. So I hope that will be it within the next 5 years.
Good. And last question for you, Lars. It's more like a question from me. Do you have any subjects that you would like to see addressed in perhaps in a similar webinar or in a follow-up meeting? Can you mention some of these?
Yeah, well, I would be interested if other universities or other companies share their knowledge, their experiences about a hybrid environment. So keeping a little piece of your infrastructure on premises and running a little bit of your infrastructure in the cloud. Take, for example, Kubernetes, or how do you get your data from on premises to your cloud environment via a secure way.
Okay, that's clear. Question for you, Christoph. You mentioned in your presentation that the discussion to move to Rocky Linux took you about 6 months. How much time took it on a technical level to migrate to Rocky Linux?
So if you are already on CentOS 8, it's one command per machine. So they provide some scripts which just do some changes, which basically just change the name and a few other things, and that's it. And if you have to go from CentOS 8 to Rocky 8, it's similar than CentOS 7 to 8. So we install a new machine and then we just migrate to service. Since Rocky is downstream of Red Hat now, it's usually, well, they literally call it bug for bug, 100% compatibility to Red Hat. So they don't fix anything, they don't change anything. So whatever runs on CentOS or Red Hat also runs on Rocky.
Cool. Okay, and I saw in your presentation that you used NetApp in your OpenStack infrastructure. Is there a reason why you use NetApp instead of open source storage?
It's a historical reason. So this was a box that we had lying around. So this was already out of support when we started 5 years ago. And then in the other zone that I showed, I think we have the Ceph cluster now, which is also what we will go for in the new cluster. Yeah.
All right.
It still worked well. I just want to add that. So even though it's not an open source storage, NetApp actually has an OpenStack driver, and so it also actually worked surprisingly well. So even for a commercial vendor in that sense.
Good. Yeah. Good. It should be. And do you also have some subjects that you would like to see addressed in a similar webinar in the future, Christoph?
Yeah, I think what could be nice is if we get some experience from universities that perhaps on the central IT, if I call it like that, migrated from a more vendor-oriented infrastructure to a more open source one, and then linked to that, or perhaps in parallel to that, how others have actually addressed the challenges maybe that Lars and me outlined today. Because we of course figured out a lot of things ourselves, I guess, but we may also learn from others, how they specifically went through the different hurdles that they faced. Yeah. But I think since we grew up in this open source world, let's say, we may also not know what these vendor challenges actually are, or the limitations, right? So having this experience of organizations that did the switch, that would be quite interesting, I guess.
Sure. All right. Thanks, Christoph. Thanks, Lars. Thanks, everybody, for joining. That about wraps it up. I hope that this was a very well spent hour of your time. Let me know if you have any additional questions, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So if you have any additional questions, please let me know via LinkedIn or another way. Just mail me. And if you would like to get in touch with anyone from the University of Luxembourg or the Tilburg University, also let me know. Maybe that they can discuss further questions or further things that you would like to learn. Also, if you like the idea of these webinars and would like to share something interesting about your open source infrastructure, I would love to hear from you. Perhaps we can organize a follow-up webinar on these topics, or do something else in that matter. Just think of something to get in touch with each other, and be persuasive, like Lars mentioned earlier. So that would be great, everybody. Thanks for attending, and yeah, take care. See you another time. Thanks.